Battery's Cup of Linux presents the Linux Zoo Crew. We have an exciting episode for you all today. This will be a free-form discussion on how developers can make Linux better. Before we begin, I would like to pass the microphone to Total OS Today, who will introduce our speakers.
Thank you very much, Spatry, and yes, we have another terrific show. We have today Edward12, we have Lixer01, we have Midnight, we also have Opti Ubuntu Studio 64, we have Pincast, we also have Chef, of course, Spatry, we have the Arch Noob, and of course myself, Toss Today, and finally we have Willie Generic. Spatry, back to you.
Welcome, one and all, and just a friendly reminder to all of you who are in Spatry's listening room. You can still voice your comments, questions, and suggestions in IRC. I will be monitoring the communications, and we will be discussing your ideas. Now, before I start, I would like to thank everyone who participated on my YouTube channel, Google+, and Facebook pages. One of my viewers suggested we talk about how Linux can be improved, and I thought this would be a magnificent topic for a free-form discussion. All right, and we've got all seats full today, which is a wonderful thing. And there is one thing that I can think about that Linux could be improved upon, and that is support for Windows applications. And when I speak of that, I'm talking about Wine. As a web developer, I use Flash. I use, matter of fact, I use a number of Macromedia products, and I'd also love to see my Windows video editors working on this platform. However, I'm unable to get a lot of those types of applications running. Does anybody have any ideas on this, on Wine, and anybody have any experience with Wine?
I've had a little bit of experience with Wine running Mac on a stick, a little emulator that I got on the internet.
I know it's only 32-bit. I remember having to get a multi-load system going when I was running Slackware on my desktop.
All the Windows apps should have support for like the graphics and the additional extras that come with it. Like one program I had trouble trying to get was the Sims 3 running and didn't work so well in Linux. It did run, but it had a bit of a failure there.
All right, and Midnight, you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, I'd just rather see better Wine support for things like Steam, because I know with Distro rising up that gaming is going to become more prominent on Linux in the future. But yeah, with the rise of Distro on Linux, gaming is going to become more prominent in Linux in the future. But for users like me who spend a lot of money in gaming on Steam, you can't transfer your Steam games over to Distro, so that's just kind of like wasted money there. But getting Steam to work under Wine is pretty easy with playing on Linux, but Steam doesn't really function properly. And you have to install the Microsoft Core fonts, which really makes the fonts inside the web browsers look ugly. And if you don't have them installed, the games look ugly. And getting most games to work in general is a pain in, especially trying to get full screen games to work, or games like Terraria, Microsoft network frameworks, which are even harder to work with because then you're toying with network frameworks that were meant for the Microsoft network inside of Linux networks.
Okay, now Total OS Today mentioned that dual booting solves everything in terms of using these, in terms of using your Windows products and that sort of thing. But a lot of people don't like feel it's inconvenient to have to shut down the computer and restart to a different operating system. Now, Willie Generic, you had something you wanted to add to that.
Well, I have tried VirtualBox and VMware to put Windows inside of, so there was no need to do that, but I'm afraid that it may have worked, but I think that also helps too.
I just like to say it can be difficult to get stuff running, but you got to say though, it's pretty awesome what the guys are doing. It's definitely not an easy task that they've set for themselves. I'm glad to see that's running as well as it is.
Now, one thing I would like to note is the fact that the Wine team has been doing magnificent work or improvements in Wine. Also, Crossover, which I happen to support, is also doing a very nice job. I would not be a least bit surprised if Wine will eventually be able to run just about any software that we have running today, given a few more years, of course. Okay, now we have somebody here mentioning using VirtualBox, and specifically Pingcast is mentioning that VirtualBox does not do 3D acceleration very well. Tell us about your experiences with that, please.
Well, I have, it doesn't, but there are experimental drivers you can get with Oracle, and those did not work out too well with my experience. Somebody told me to read up on VT-D. I have no idea what that is, so I'll have to take a look at that. But I believe Usebattery, with the proprietary VirtualBox, have successfully gotten acceleration working well with XP, but I don't have XP. All I have is 7.
I have noticed that if you boot your machine into safe mode, you can install the VirtualBox drivers, and it does bring accelerated graphics, especially for older games. And I'm talking games that are at least 6 or 7 years old. I would like to actually see that improve.
So you have, wait, which version of Windows?
I'm using Windows XP.
Alright, but you've gotten this working.
Yes, with pretty good results, I might add.
Alright, well, I hope it works with 7. That'd be pretty neat if it did.
I've enabled 3D acceleration in Windows 7 on safe mode on VirtualBox, and even allocating it with loads of RAM. It's alright for most things, but stuff like, because Netflix is not supported on Linux, I use Windows XP under a virtual machine on Windows 7, and it plays alright, but you do get the odd stuttering and the audio's a bit choppy at times. But I mean, after run a virtual machine to get Windows applications running, we should be able to just run it under Wine. I mean, I've managed to get Steam installed, but when it comes to playing a game like Black Ops that I've purchased, it's just not working at all. I've tried looking up workarounds, but it's just not happening. They've still got a bit of way to go to catch up with what you can do on Windows. And like Spatcher said, it's just a pain to have to dual boot, because you want to be able to run Linux. And some people don't have a lot of RAM to be able to allocate it to a virtual machine, because it is a pain.
Midnight, you had something you would like to add to this.
Well, yeah, as you said, the Wine developers are doing a great job improving upon their program and adding more and more support for more programs. But honestly, I know we're discussing Wine, but I'd like to see more support on the actual developers' ends of the programs that we're trying to emulate for support for Linux, because it's not the 90s anymore when Linux was just a bunch of nerds playing around with computers. Now it's actually a mainstream operating system with regular people trying to use it. And the fact that big companies like Netflix and Skype are still alienating Linux users is a serious problem. So I'm hoping with the new release of the Ubuntu LTS and things like the Ubuntu TV coming out, the KDE Spark tablet, that Linux will start becoming more prominent, and just the actual programs themselves will start supporting Linux without us having to emulate support for them.
Okay, and Shaft, you had something you wanted to add.
Yes. With regards to virtualization, the alternative view, or the alternative way to it, is you've either got the dual boot, which is not useful. You've got your normal virtualization, which takes your actual and emulates your guest operating system, and then you've got actual physical hardware going through to the guest. So in my instance, I've got 2 graphics cards, one for the host and one for the guest, so they're both exactly separated. And what that does is to dedicate hardware to your guest operating system. That's what I was talking about with regards to VTD. Virtualization generally, you've got 2 PTX and VTD. VTX is based on the processor, VTD is on the hardware. And with VTD, you have to have a supported processor and a supported motherboard to get that working. It's quite tricky, but it's possible.
I'd also like to mention VTDs for Intel, AMD, from what I'm reading on Wikipedia, AMD's equivalent is AMD VI.
Yes, that's perfectly correct. I've only worked with VTD because I've just been buying Intel processors lately.
And the original name for AMD VI was IOMMU, so if that pops up, that's probably what the person's talking about.
Yep, that's perfectly correct, yeah.
Okay, now as a web developer and multimedia enthusiast, one of the things that I have seen, and I've seen a number of people mention this, is that we would really love to see better software made for Linux that will allow us to get the job done, such as better video editors and that sort of thing. And something that I would like to see the community of developers do is actually join together, like the developers of OpenShot joining up with the developers of Cinelera and Kdenlive Live and that sort of thing, to make a video editor that would really give the Windows competition out there a real run for their money. And does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, I think we should definitely really work a lot more together and really take advantage of the fact that we're a community and we can use other people's software, and we need to take from each other all of our good software and kind of combine it all together and get something really, really good going.
Well, I'm more excited for Lightworks than anything. Even though Lightworks is going to be a paid video editor, it's probably going to be the best video editor for Linux around when it is finally released. I believe it's in a private beta right now.
I haven't seen any progress on that just yet. Okay, Edward next, and then I'll pass the mic over to Will.
Yeah, when you say you want Linux to have a good comparison run for the money, we've got to remember that everything on software for most of Linux is free, so we've got to think, will the vendors do it in aims of doing it for nothing? People are putting so much effort in the video editing software because the people are paying for it, so they're getting money out of it. If they did it in Linux, they'll be spending all that time paying the developers, because the paid developers who are making all this, like Sony Creative Software and Adobe and all the rest of it, they won't get anything back from it. That's why I think there's not much in terms of video editing software for Linux, because it's people doing it in their own time.
Well, I think Linux is great and all, but not. I know everyone may or may not be willing to try open source tools, and especially using video editors. But actually, video editors, the Linux versions of it, going to switch over to it, or what would happen?
I think that's the point that we really want to try to address, is the fact that if Linux had software that was a little bit more comprehensive than what we have now, this would really attract more users. Now, most of the software that is available in our repositories right now is pretty darn good. As a matter of fact, I've been able to replace most of my Windows applications with Linux applications. However, for instance, I do all my video editing in Kdenlive Live because I like its tools and everything, and then I use OpenShot to render those files because I'm not happy with how Kdenlive Live renders out my projects. Even though they do have templates that you can download and different settings for creating these files, I'm just still happier with what OpenShot does. And really, as a power user, I shouldn't have to use two different applications to get one job done.
I remember once, it might have been a year ago, one person complained on the Linux.net forums about not having one good editor. He said he couldn't really get the job done on Linux, and another person replied saying, okay, here's all the programs I use, and he had about 5 or 6 programs going, and the one guy who's complaining, he was able to get all that done on Windows with just Movie Maker, that one program. It'd be awesome if we could kind of get the one program going as well with multimedia.
Arch Noob, we haven't heard from you yet.
I was just waiting my turn. Okay, I've been sitting here listening to everybody talk about how they want everybody to come together and develop all this software and everything. But there's an old saying goes that too many cooks can spoil a soup.
I'll have to agree with you, Arch Noob. You're right. Too many cooks in the kitchen can definitely spoil the soup there. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, please?
Yes, thank you, Spat. Now, I'm not saying that people should not go out and develop and collaborate on a piece of software, especially if it's open source. And in doing so, you can come up with a good idea, but expect for every good idea that comes out there, you are going to have at least 20 or 30 bad ones that result from that.
As a dual booter, the world of Linux really is a fascinating concept. You can take a state-of-the-art technological marvel, such as an operating system, download it for free, and change it any way you want. The choices are, wow, so many choices. That's the strength, but that's the weakness. Like was being said, too many cooks spoil the broth. How I see it, there is no standardization of quality. There is quality, but there isn't a quality standard across the board. And I think that's something in Linux that I'm not sure that can be fixed, because Linux, for the price of freedom in Linux is standardization of quality. How do you see it?
There are some developers that are really doing a magnificent job on the software that they are creating, and and quality is something that we'll probably be addressing here a little bit later in the show, because there are so many distributions out there right now, and people make their own different little spins and that sort of thing, and the quality can be sketchy at best. I'll give you an example. We have a spin-off of Ubuntu called Pear or Comise now, and I've tried to use 2 different versions in my virtual machine, and they really weren't quite up. They really kind of fell short of my expectations because they were a little bit buggy and that sort of thing.
I love using Linux, but I have yet to find one, and I say this with all due respect to developers, it's a lot of work, but I have yet to find one that can completely replace my Windows 7 desktop. A lot come close, like Zorin. I think Ubuntu 12.4 is great and will be great. But again, until there is a standardization of quality, there's always that little question mark. What bug is in this one? What is going to break in this one? What really is going to take me off like ATI drivers like last time? So
you make a very good point there, that there should be a quality standard across the board that these developers should be looking into to ensure that the distributions that they are making are going to be able to function the way the end user wants them to, and give them pretty much a bug-free experience.
I agree.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
See, that's my problem with Linux in general, is companies like Canonical or Linux Mint, they have the huge communities, they have the funding, they have the support, but yet they still keep putting out these operating systems with these little bugs that can just break everything and instantly turn off any Windows user who's looking for an alternative. So I'm hoping they fix that with 12.04, so users fleeing from the god-awful mess that is Windows 8 will have a safe haven in Linux with Ubuntu or any Ubuntu derivatives.
And this is one thing that I cannot stress enough to anybody that is new to Linux and is trying it out for the first time. I highly recommend that you try a distribution that is at least in the top 10 on distrowatch.com. Usually those are the major players out there that are doing a, that do have a standard of quality that they're, to ensure that the end user is going to have a user experience that they're going to really like.
Midnight, addressing your statement there about Canonical and Linux Mint, I've got to tell you that after installing the latest version of Ubuntu Studio 64, the 12.04 release, when I got a bug inside the beta, I was, Canonical has actually implemented a bunch of beta testing tools that send the information automatically back. So they are actually doing a really good job of being able to find the bugs in their releases before it actually gets put out to the public. So I'm thinking, after all of these different versions of Linux that I've tested out, Ubuntu and Canonical is really stepping up with getting their beta testing done, making sure that their product works before it gets into the hands of the consumer.
Yeah, that's good, because I was experimenting with KDE a couple months back, and I was using Ubuntu, and I had a hell of a time using it or even installing it. The installer was crashing, and then when I actually got into it, the network card wasn't working right, and then when I got that working, like, my network speed was being throttled, so downloading updates was taking hours at a time, and I'm just sitting there thinking the entire time that a company like Canonical would put this garbage out and call it stable, which I couldn't understand.
I think that's probably one of the biggest problems with Linux is the fact that, everything is built around modules, and so many different modules work with so many different pieces of hardware where you do run into a problem, it's really tough to troubleshoot it.
I was just going to say basically that Linux is free for all, isn't it? People put their own take on it, and they don't know every single thing about Linux, so they don't know about the issues that they're going to come into. It's only when they distribute it and people come in and they give them bugs, and it's down to developers and that to sort it out. And in the meantime, people are getting bad experiences with stuff. And like you were saying, what about these big companies like Canonical and stuff? Why are they still having issues? But Linux have said, look, there's thousands of hardware choices and everything. They can't support every single thing, but they're working to try and support most system configurations. And people are just needing to develop it and make it better.
What I wanted to say basically, yeah, it's all about the quality of what comes out, and then you've got the spin-offs. Like take Ultimate Edition 3.2. That by far has to be one of the worst spin-offs of Ubuntu I've ever had the experience of dealing with. 3.1 was actually very good, but then when everybody started talking about that, oh my goodness, we have to release 3.2 out now. They took absolutely no time to test it or anything. They just put it out there for the public, and that wasn't a very good idea on their part.
Well, it's also a commitment you have to make when using Linux. It's not just, you have to keep in mind that Linux isn't Windows, and it's just not the same. So, over the years, the whole module dependency thing, there are problems with that, okay? Don't get me wrong about that, but at the same time, you're making a commitment to use this unstable software, and, you're going to have to kind of help out with that,
And really, that's what it's all about. Getting a membership to the Launchpad, that way, if you encounter any of these issues, you can mention what problem it is that you did have with a specific distribution, not necessarily distribution, but with a specific program, and you tell the developers exactly what steps you took to cause this error so that they can try and replicate this issue and get it fixed. And this is one way that we as users can make Linux better. Whenever we run into any of these little problems, we can go to the Launchpad and report these issues so that they can fix them, and then potentially have a better software solution when the next update comes out.
Yeah, just sitting there and complaining about how something's really buggy and not working doesn't really help. You kind of have to go out there and tell the developers what's specifically wrong. And I think that's how Linux kind of gets off, because if there wasn't any of that, I'm pretty sure we'd be in the Stone Age right now with Linux.
This was a point that Alan Pope, engineer at Canonical, made last week, that, they were receiving a lot of complaints from people. They were just saying that Unity stinks and that sort of thing, which is of no use. But by telling Canonical how Unity stinks, why they find it's counterintuitive, and that sort of thing has really helped them to make a better product. I can say myself, I like the way Unity is shaping up, and this looks like something that I will be able to eventually implement in my Arch-based system sometime down the road once they really get all the bugs and little niggles worked out of it.
Yeah, I'm really liking the way Unity has come along too. Back in the days of 11.04, when it was first mainstreamed into top environment of Ubuntu, I really didn't like it. It was really buggy and it was slow, wasn't responsive, and was hard to find your files and was hard to use. I've been using it for about a year and a half now through Ubuntu 11.04 and Ubuntu 11.10. And after you get used to it and all the little customizations you can add onto it, it becomes actually a really good desktop environment, especially for somebody who's more mouse-based than keyboard-based.
Okay, now, something that I would like to bring up is that there was mention here made on drivers. Now, this is something that bugs a lot of people, where we have some people that are unable to get their wireless drivers working. And of course, we have the NDIS wrapper. I've never had an opportunity to try it to see if it actually works. But drivers, especially sound and video drivers, have been a major issue for a lot of people. And who would like to start us off on the drivers discussion? Lixer, you're first.
All right. So I've had quite a big experience with drivers just recently, like 2 hours ago. I mean, the whole driver issue is a big one in the whole Linux issue community in that part, because if you don't want to, I have problems all the time with NVIDIA proprietary drivers with screen tearing and issues and all that, and as well as open source drivers, and there's just a ton of problems that I've run into in the past.
Yeah, I've had issues with wireless before. Now, as you said, you didn't have time or an experience where you had to use the NDIS wrapper tool. But I actually did have to use the NDIS wrapper tool back in the days of 10.10 because I was using a somewhat newish laptop and it wasn't detecting the wireless card. So I actually went and downloaded the source of the NDIS wrapper and just made it from inside the operating system. And I was able to install my wireless driver and it actually got it working. But in my personal opinion, if you're going to be using proprietary drivers on your system, it's probably best to just use the proprietary drivers that were specifically made for Linux. Because in my personal experience, the proprietary wireless drivers for Linux work better than the proprietary ones that were made for Windows.
For me, when I was using Ubuntu 9.04, my wireless card was actually a Broadcom chipset. Ubuntu did not recognize the actual card till like at least 9.10 on up, but 9.04 was like my first use of it. It didn't pick it up that well until I did at least probably install a driver to get it working, which I had to do. But later on, like Mandriva and other distributions caught the card immediately and began picking it up and using it. But Ubuntu, when I first started it, it did not work out too. I had to use Ethernet till the time being.
Yeah, the only distro that I've had that I can use with my ATI graphics drivers is Ubuntu itself. Even though when I've downloaded Zorin or say Kubuntu or Mint, when I install the same graphic driver through additional graphics drivers, I have issues with screen tearing and just the display messes up. And I'm thinking to myself, well, these are just ports of the original Ubuntu. Why couldn't they just add it over? So when it comes straight out the box and I install my version of, say, Zorin and I install my proprietary drivers, why aren't I getting the same results as I was getting on Ubuntu? Was it an issue with Unity was able to keep it running better than it was with GNOME Shell or what? And I'm just thinking, how do I know when it's fixed? At the moment, I'm just staying away from installing proprietary drivers for my graphics card. I don't know when this issue's being fixed unless I keep checking on alt forums all the way around Linux to find out whether it's being sorted for my specific driver. And I can mention it to the developers, but 9 times out of 10 they're too busy with other problems to get this issue fixed. Just for one graphics card. And that's the only thing that's really annoying about Linux.
All right, one thing that I thought was really, that I really didn't understand when I was new to Linux. I used to have a little dish that would allow me to pull in internet signals for my house, because I used to have my office on the other end of the house, and for some reason I had to go out and buy a little dish to pull in the signal. And I found that when I was running Ubuntu 10.10, it would not power it. But then when I switched to Mint 11, the Katya one, it did work. Later, much to my surprise, I found that by upgrading the kernel, it was actually providing more support for more of my hardware. It comes at an expense, though, because I learned that if I'm updating my kernel, if I'm using a proprietary display driver, I found that I could not boot into a graphical user interface. And I know on my channel I have a number of videos where I'm showing how to upgrade your kernel. However, you have to revert to the original Xorg drivers before upgrading the kernel, otherwise you're going to run into some problems. Has anybody else ever tried this?
Yeah, I upgraded recently. I upgraded my Ubuntu 11.10 kernel from the 3.2 version that was being pushed into the repos to the 3.30 stable precise version. And I, like an idiot, I didn't disable the proprietary wireless driver I had installed, and that started causing issues with my wireless card. So I ended up having to reinstall Ubuntu completely because I couldn't figure it out.
That's something to definitely think about. So usually my recommendation, if you wish to use an older Linux distribution, as soon as you're done installing it, then you can go ahead and upgrade the kernel prior to installing your proprietary drivers, and you should pretty much then be able to have a system that's going to be working okay for you. Okay, now let's go ahead and move this on along here. I'm going to call everybody one at a time, and I'm going to ask each of you, what is the one thing you like least about Linux, and what could be improved about it? We'll start with you, Edward.
And the least thing I like about Linux is the proprietary drivers. Fair enough, they can't get it for every single graphics card, but at least have like a basic graphical user interface support, say like fallback mode, and be able to use 3D effects, or maybe just have it in the update center or something to say, look, there's been an update for your proprietary drivers.
Okay, Lixer, what is the thing you like the least about Linux that could be improved?
Same thing as Edward. It's the proprietary drivers, especially at NVIDIA. I'd like to see them actually try to work with other open source developers and try to fix their proprietary driver up, and even try to make it open source.
Okay, and Midnight, what is the thing you like the least about Linux that should be improved?
I don't like the ununified community in the sense that all these different distributions all use different package management systems, which spreads out software across a bunch of distributions, and you find software that worked on one distribution won't work on another one because the developer didn't want to write it to be able to work with the Fedora package management system, or something that you can find in the Arch repos you wouldn't be able to find in the Ubuntu repos. So I hate that there's not just one unified package system, because everybody wants to use a different one because everybody thinks that one's better than the other.
Okay, good point there. Opti, you mentioned that fallback and 3D FX should not ever go together. Could you expand upon that?
Well, Edward was mentioning, if he had a problem with the video driver and being able to use fallback mode with 3DFX. Well, fallback mode is more of a fix your computer type boot, gives you just enough to get in and then fix your problem. That's what fallback's for.
I gotcha. Okay, and Shaft, what is the thing you like the least about Linux that could be improved?
Well, for me, Linux implies the kernel. And the kernel for me, it has been stable. I love it. I really do. I'm not... for me, the drivers, everything works. The problem is the distributions implementing parts of the kernel. because what they do is that they take bits and pieces that they like and wrap it all up into a little distribution for everyone to use. But the kernel itself has been working perfectly fine for 15 odd years. And where it's failing is the distribution implementation of the kernel itself. So that's where people run into problems when they try to update their drivers and so forth. Really, that's really it, really, to be quite honest with you. The kernel, love it. Distributions, not so much.
Okay, thank you, Chef. And the Arch Noob, what do you like the least about Linux, and what should be improved?
Well, what I least like about Linux is also what I like about Linux, and that is the broad spectrum of distros out there. There is something for everybody, but in that aspect, it also takes something away from everybody. Like what people were mentioning about various package managers and different kernel versions and stuff like that. You take something like that and you take one thing for one thing, and then it doesn't work with such and such. Like something for Ubuntu might not work with Arch, but it might not function as well.
Okay, and Willie Generic, what do you like the least about Linux that should be improved?
What I like least about it is that at least you don't have to worry about being infected with any kind of malware there is. But the thing is, the desktop environment. One of the desktop environments, such as KDE, kind of causes the desktop environment effects to crash when you enable it, requiring a little tweak, a workaround to get around this problem.
Okay, very good and honest answers from the panel here. And of course, I mentioned earlier the thing that I like the least about Linux at this time is its support for Windows applications. I would like to see Wine improve, and but I do feel that it's heading in the right direction. You know, lots of new programs are being introduced into Wine. Items are beginning to work better. We have some wonderful front ends for it. We have Vineyard, we have Play on Linux, and a plethora of other front ends for it as well that help to at least simplify the process of using it. I would, however, like to see better front ends for Wine, some improvements on those for because you know, the thing is, I spent a lot of money over the years on software, and I'd like to still be able to continue using that older software if I can. But there are improvements, and I'm happy to see the direction that Linux is starting to take.
Spatry, another thing that I'd love to see improved in Linux and how developers could make it better is maybe find a really good, actually functioning voice recognition software. I know that Dragon for the Windows PC works really well. I'd love to see something like that on the Linux platform.
Yeah, me too.
It's funny you guys mention this because we already have that in Android. When you press the microphone button, you speak into your handheld phone, and I guess it communicates with the Google server, and it converts your voice into text, much to my surprise, with a 95% accuracy, I'm willing to bet here. And that is something I would really love to see come to Linux as well.
Do they have that built
Exactly.
into the current release candidate of the Android OS that you did a review of?
I know I'm running Froyo on my Android right now, which is 2.2, and they already have that. And so I would imagine the newer versions would have it as well.
Ice Cream Sandwich has it, and it does it really well. And it's basically the best TTS ever, really. The best voice, voice to speech. And if they could implement it in Linux, like they say, they'd get more people on it, I think.
Okay, well, we have had a wonderful conversation on this. I'd like to thank everybody for participating in this show. Lots of really good ideas for making Linux better. Linux is already a wonderful innovation. pretty much does everything that I want it to do, but there are a few things that could be made better. But the thing is, we do have a rock-solid community out there. It's easy to find answers to your questions, and I just cannot sing it enough praises, especially for what you've got to pay out of pocket for it, which is next to nothing for most distributions out there. Well, I'd like to take this time to thank everybody again, and for all of you who are listening, please be sure to join us on Saturday nights. We're going to be doing this every Saturday night or Sunday if you're in European countries. I will have a link in the show notes where you can use a time zone converter so that you can be with us. I always recommend that you get here about a half hour early. This way, you can be sure that you will have a seat. I have a 10-seat limit in the chat room. However, anybody in the listening room always gets to participate by typing into the IRC room. I'd like to thank you all for listening. Google+, Facebook, and Twitter. We'll keep you up to date every time I send a new video to this channel. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next time.